It wasn't an ordinary morning in the county courthouse. The benches were packed shoulder to shoulder with defendants, families, lawyers, and curious onlookers. Every shuffle of papers, every whisper echoed loudly in the cavernous room. The judge on the bench looked tired, flipping through his files impatiently. Two officers stood at the front, puffing their chests like they owned the place, while others guarded the aisles, scanning faces as if they were looking for trouble. And then there was Angela. Dressed in a neat blazer, clutching a leather folder, she sat quietly in the second row. She didn't look nervous. She looked composed, calm. But the way her eyes studied the courtroom made it clear she wasn't here as an ordinary spectator. As the clerk began calling cases, Angela rose from her seat and started walking toward the front desk. The tapping of her heels on the tiled floor drew attention. But before she could reach, one officer stepped directly into her path. "Where do you think you're going?" he barked. His tone wasn't official. It was dismissive, like he was talking to someone who didn't belong there. Angela calmly replied, "I have business with the court." "Step aside." But instead of letting her pass, a second officer joined in, smirking. "Business? What business could you possibly have here?" People in the courtroom began murmuring. Heads turned. All eyes were suddenly on Angela, standing tall but blocked by two men in uniform. Angela didn't raise her voice. She didn't look flustered. She simply repeated, "Move, I'm supposed to be at the bench." The first officer sneered. "The bench? You mean that bench?" He jabbed a thumb toward the judge's chair. "Don't waste our time." And then it happened. A sharp, sudden slap across Angela's face. The sound cracked through the silence like a whip. Gasps erupted from every corner of the courtroom. A woman in the back covered her mouth. Someone muttered, "Oh my God!" Even the judge froze mid-sentence, his gavel hovering in the air. But Angela? She didn't flinch. She steadied herself, adjusted her blazer slightly, and fixed her eyes straight ahead. Her calmness in the face of humiliation made the moment even heavier. The air turned thick with disbelief. The spectators leaned forward, some whispering furiously, "Did that officer just slap her?" "Is no one going to stop this?" The officers crossed their arms, confident they had put her in her place. The judge on the bench hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, but said nothing. Everyone waited for Angela to shout, cry, or leave. But she did none of those things. The way she stood there, silent, steady, unshaken, sent ripples of unease through the room. Instead of reacting with anger, Angela slowly reached into her bag. Every eye in the courtroom followed her hand, half expecting her to pull out a phone, maybe to record or call someone. But what she pulled out was far more unsettling to the officers. A thick leather folder, worn but well kept, stamped with a golden emblem. She placed it gently on the desk in front of her, her movements deliberate, as if she wasn't in a hurry at all. The officer who slapped her chuckled mockingly. "What, you gonna file a complaint? Go ahead." "No one's gonna believe you." Angela didn't even look at him. She simply opened the folder and began flipping through the pages. The court clerk, who had been typing lazily just moments before, suddenly stiffened. She squinted at the emblem embossed on Angela's folder. Her hands hovered over her keyboard, frozen midair, her lips parted slightly. She recognized that symbol, and it wasn't something any ordinary citizen would ever carry. It was a federal seal. The clerk's heart raced. She glanced nervously at the judge, then leaned toward the bailiff standing near the bench and whispered urgently. The bailiff's casual stance snapped into rigid attention. He took a sharp breath, eyes darting toward Angela. Something was very, very wrong. The presiding judge, noticing the sudden change in the clerk and bailiff's demeanor, narrowed his eyes. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, looking down at Angela more closely now. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "please step forward." His voice lacked its earlier authority. It carried uncertainty now, even respect. Angela closed the folder calmly, tucked it under her arm, and began walking to the front. Her footsteps echoed louder than before, each one pulling the room into a deeper silence. The same officers who had stopped her minutes ago now stepped back slightly, their confidence shaken. They couldn't explain why, but something about the way the judge had addressed her sent a shiver of doubt through them. Angela placed the folder on the clerk's desk and slid a single document across. The clerk's hands trembled as she picked it up and passed it to the judge. The judge adjusted his glasses, reading the page once. His brows shot up. He read it again, slower this time, his face draining of color. The room buzzed with curiosity. People leaned over whispering, "What is it?" "What's going on?" Finally, the judge lifted his head, his voice unsteady but clear. "Your Honor, would you like to take your seat?" The entire courtroom froze. The officer's smug expressions collapsed into shock. "And Angela?" She simply nodded, her calmness now carrying the weight of undeniable authority. The second the senior judge addressed Angela as, "Your Honor," the room froze. The sound of that one phrase was louder than the slap had been. Whispers erupted instantly. Did he just call her judge? Wait, she's the judge? The two officers, who just minutes ago had puffed out their chests like they owned the courtroom, now stood pale. Their arrogance evaporated in an instant. Their eyes darted around, searching for support, but everyone's gaze was fixed on them, not with respect, but with disgust. Angela didn't move quickly. She let that silence stretch, let them stew in the weight of what they had done. It wasn't just a mistake. They had struck the very person they were supposed to protect, and worse, the one person who outranked them all. Angela began her slow walk toward the raised bench. Each step of her heels echoed like a countdown. The spectators leaned forward, phones in hand, some even recording. The bailiff, who earlier hesitated, rushed to pull out the chair with a trembling hand. He knew he had failed to act, and now he, too, stood exposed before the crowd. Angela's robe was handed to her. The moment she slipped it on, the atmosphere in the room shifted entirely. This wasn't the woman who had been humiliated. This was Judge Angela Brooks. When she raised the gavel and struck it down, the crack rang like thunder. People gasped. "This court," she said in a voice that carried to every corner, "is now in session, properly." Angela's gaze locked on the officers, sharp and steady. "Step forward," she ordered. Their boots felt heavier than lead as they shuffled to the front. Their bravado was gone. They looked like schoolboys caught stealing candy, but this was far more serious. Angela's voice was calm but powerful. "You assaulted me in this courtroom. You disrupted proceedings. You disgraced your badges," the words echoed. The officers swallowed hard, unable to respond. Their silence wasn't strength. It was fear. Everyone could see it. Angela leaned forward. "Do you deny it?" The room went deathly silent. The ticking of the old courtroom clock suddenly seemed deafening. Neither man spoke. Because they couldn't. The silence was broken, not by the officers, but by the crowd. "I saw it all." A man near the front row shouted. "She did nothing wrong," another added. "They struck her like she wasn't even human," cried a woman near the back. It wasn't one or two voices. It was the entire gallery rising against them. One by one, people stood, pointing at the officers, their voices overlapping in outrage. The officers' faces turned crimson, sweat glistening on their brows. Their uniforms no longer gave them power. In fact, their uniforms now marked them as the villains. Angela raised her gavel again. "Crack! Order!" she commanded, and instantly the crowd fell silent. Angela's voice carried the weight of centuries of law. "Effective immediately, you are suspended from duty." Gasps filled the room. Nobody had expected such swift justice. The bailiff, red-faced with shame, moved to disarm them. He unclipped their badges, removed their belts, and carefully set their guns aside. The metallic clink of each badge hitting the wooden desk echoed like a funeral bell. The officers stood stripped, not just of their weapons, but of their dignity. Angela's eyes never left them. "You will remain here until federal marshals arrive. Justice cannot wait, not when the people themselves have witnessed the truth." The spectators sat stunned. They weren't just watching a courtroom drama, they were witnessing a transformation. Moments ago, Angela had been the victim. Now, she embodied authority, strength, and justice. The same officers who thought they could silence her now stood exposed in front of the very people they had tried to intimidate. Even the presiding judge, who had been silent during the assault, lowered his head in shame. His silence spoke volumes. He had failed where Angela had risen. Angela scanned the room, her voice calm but commanding. Let this be a reminder. Justice is not about who holds a badge. Justice is about truth, and truth is not intimidated by violence. Some in the gallery wiped away tears. Others whispered that they had just seen history being made. Minutes later, the doors opened, and federal marshals entered. Their heavy boots echoed through the tense silence. They didn't ask questions. They had been briefed. The disgraced officers were escorted out, their heads bowed, their hands shaking. No applause, no cheers, just silence. The silence of justice being served. Angela tapped the gavel one final time. This session is adjourned. As people began to leave, some approached her quietly, whispering words of gratitude. Others simply looked at her in awe. They had entered a courtroom expecting a routine hearing, but left having witnessed a moment that would be remembered for years. Angela remained seated a moment longer, her hand resting on the gavel. She had not just defended herself. She had defended the very meaning of justice, and in that moment, everyone knew. The courtroom would never forget the day a victim became the judge.